Callum, we are trying to find where are the speakers. So some of them are on the green room, and my colleagues are going to ask them to join us here. Callum, from now on, we are going to use the chat as communication channel, okay?
Okay, I think I'm okay to start. I'm okay to begin. Hopefully everyone can see me and everyone can hear me clearly. I'll just get going. I'll assume that everyone's here that needs to be here. Okay, so welcome to the Chevening Conference. My name's Callum McGregor. I'm just the chair for this session on the topic of law and social justice. So I'm really thrilled to have this unique opportunity to learn from our three talented Chevening scholars, Emine Sheykhametova, Hawa Ocheni, and John Ogunjimi. So now I've not met any of you before today, so please accept my humble apologies if I've just butchered the pronunciation of anybody's names. Normally I like to meet people beforehand. So I'm a lecturer at the School of Education at the University of Edinburgh. I'm Deputy Head of Institute for Education, Community and Society. I teach on a master's programme in social justice and community action, and it attracts students from all over the world who are interested in social justice and global justice issues. So our own students are mostly mid-career professionals who have a lot of experience, and they've got a practical and academic interest in working in communities and working with communities to achieve social justice goals in a number of different contexts, in the third sector, in the public sector, even in the private sectors. So my own research interests lie at this intersection of education and social justice, and I'm currently conducting research into education for climate justice. So that's just a little about me. So as you can probably gather from that brief summary, my own academic expertise really lies more in the domain of social justice and working with communities rather than law. So to me, as such, I've got an enduring interest in the relationship between the theory of social justice and the practice of social justice, as well as the role of education in mediating between theory and practice. And to me, social justice is a really dynamic, a contested, a living concept really that's rooted in praxis. That is the dialectical unity of both theory and practice together. And to paraphrase the radical educator, the Brazilian educator, Paulo Freire, theory that's uninformed by and uninformed by and without a commitment to action is as inauthentic as action that's uninformed by theoretical reflection. And so for me, that's why one can never claim to have learned social justice. There's always more to learn because it evolves. The concept evolves as different social groups, as different communities struggle and name new injustices. So social justice is a concept that mobilizes people to act to bring about change, positive change. And so as such, it's informed by the ongoing struggles of social movements. And it's as much informed by these struggles on the ground as it is by, say, the normative inquiry of political philosophers or even legal scholars. And so social justice theorist Nancy Fraser uses the very useful concept, I think, of abnormal justice to describe a situation where sometimes we don't just have disputes or conflicts over injustices, but we have disputes and conflicts over the grammar, the constitutive grammar of those social injustices. So in other words, as new social and global injustices emerge, sometimes we lack an institutional framework and a shared discourse for addressing them. And that's clearly an issue in the context of global injustices, where we encounter what Nancy Fraser calls injustices of misframing, meaning that people affected by an injustice that spills over arbitrary national borders and boundaries often can lack the legal standing as citizens to challenge and address those injustices. So to summarize then, our own understandings of social justice, they're always contested, they're always evolving. And with this in mind, I'm really thrilled to hand over in a second to our three scholars to add to my own understanding as much as anything else of global social injustices by learning from what each of them have to say. And before I hand over, just really quickly, I just want to say a little about the housekeeping and the context of this, the format, if you like, of this session. So as you all know, we have three scholar presentations, and these scholar presentations are going to last 15 minutes apiece. And following the final presentation, we're going to have a live Q&A session. And so if you, as an audience, have a question for one of our presenters, you can simply put it in the Q&A box. And your questions will be, some of your questions will be selected for our presenters to answer verbally. So they're not going to be typing answers to questions, just to clarify that. So as the question and answer format's limited to 15 minutes, if we don't have time for your question, don't worry, you can feel free to carry on the conversation in the Law and Social Justice chat room, where the speakers will be available, I believe, to discuss further. They can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And you can also continue the discussion on the Chevening Scholars 2020 Facebook group, I believe. So I think that's enough kind of context from me. First up today, we've got the first presentation from Emine Sheykhametova, and it's titled Leadership in Education, Building Female Leadership Capacity for Social Justice.
Thank you very much, Callum. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well? Super, thank you very much. I honestly enjoyed your Scottish pronunciation. It gave me a bit of meditation before going first today. And I love listening to Scottish pronunciation for many years. So thank you very much for this wonderful opening. Just give me a sec to share my screen and show my PowerPoint. Right. Can you see my screen now? Yep. Okay, excellent. So my name is Emine Sheykhametova. I'm from Uzbekistan, and currently I'm doing my MA in Educational Leadership and Management with the University of Warwick. And this is where my interest to the topic that I would like to share today with all of you has been, has come from and has been sparked by. So thank you all very much. I can see a big pool of participants today. Thank you very much for your interest in my talk and in this topic in particular. And throughout today, I'll try to position the topic of female leadership in education, not just from the perspective of social justice, which is of paramount importance, but from the position of quality assurance in education at the same time. So throughout today, throughout this very short period of time of 15 minutes, I'll try to take you through the the understanding of what leadership in education is, what female leadership in education means, and what are some constraints and hindrances that women meet when attaining to the leadership positions in education. We'll also talk about building female leadership capacity for education, and I'll briefly share what research I'm doing in relation to the topic. And at the end, I will share some inspirational readings that I hope will spark your further interest in the topic. Right, so before we move on to talking about female leadership in education, it's worth to unpack a bit what an effective leader in education is all about. Who is that, right? And I'm sure looking at this question and thinking about that, many of you started recalling all the brilliant essays you were putting together about yourselves as leaders when you were applying for Chevening, because that was part of the requirement. And there have been plenty of characteristics. However, when we are thinking about educational context, which is, the research in educational context within the area of leadership is very much informed by the research in leadership in the corporate sector. And it has been developing since the second half of the previous century and has certainly boomed in the 21st century. So today, there is a very high understanding of the importance of the leadership in education and the research in the area. So many researchers trying to kind of define what leadership is, try to kind of take or carry the leadership notion away from more kind of technical and administrative roles for leaders. Well, still leaders, and you would probably agree, will have to perform the administrative and technical roles. However, what differentiates a leader from a manager in that sense is the other characteristics of being able to influence others and influence the change or pioneer the change. So this is how leadership in education is described by many researchers, and on the slide you can see some of the seminal researches in the area. So having shaped an understanding about educational leadership, let's think about female leadership in education now. So why to bother at all? Certainly, there is an element of social justice to that, and we all want to build as global leaders and leaders for our countries. We want to build just societies, and certainly the social justice of paramount importance to many of us. Or probably all of us, hopefully to all of us, I should probably say. So, but there is a bit more to that, as I said in the beginning. So female leadership in education has been proven by the research in the education sector to impact learner outcomes to great extent. And in general, effective leadership has proven to impact learner outcomes, be it at school, primary, secondary levels, or higher tertiary levels of education. So effective leadership has a direct influence on learner outcomes. And in that regard, the female leadership or the styles of leadership that women enact have a particular influence or importance, because the female leadership is characterized with such features as being caring, being collaborative, and being student-centered. And we all know from the research in education and pedagogy that student-centered approaches and methodologies are the best methodologies today to lead our learners, our students, to the success. And many of us have probably experienced this with our best teachers, with our best leaders at schools, universities, training programs. So there is a direct link between female leadership and effective learner outcomes, which is proven by research. But thinking about that, let's for a second, try to recap on whether there is justice in offering opportunities for women to attain to leadership positions. And probably you started kind of going through some of the statistics that you may have come across your own countries, your own context, or globally. But regardless of the country you're coming from, the research tells us that unfortunately, there is a huge, or I would say alarming, underrepresentation of women in leadership positions all across the globe, regardless of the socioeconomic, cultural, historical, religious backgrounds of the countries and societies. And this quote from the World Economic Forum of the last year is telling us a lot, probably, about the gap in gender equity globally across many fields. However, that becomes even more significant when we are thinking about education, because in education, we all know that the biggest workforce in education is constituent of women. And it's even more surprising and even more striking that less women, or that women face lots of obstacles and discrimination when trying to continue on leadership career development. So what are some hindrances and challenges for women? And you probably already as well started to kind of picking up on some of those that are coming from your own experiences, either by being a female leader or by working with female leaders, or coming from the context where you have faced that. So what research tells us that there are I have kind of generalized that under four big umbrellas, but there is of course more to that. So one of the biggest ones is for women to try and progress through the glass ceiling, which is, the term that is coming from, again, from the research from the corporate sector to us in education. So that is kind of an unspoken or unseen barrier created by let's say a men only or boys only club. This is how many researchers phrase it. In lots of literature. So women find it's very difficult to go through the barrier because most of the kind of rituals or habitual kind of behaviors that are being performed by the male leaders, which have been in power for many years historically, are very difficult for women to adopt. Like, for example, staying late, working hours, conducting negotiations over the glass of beer in the pub, all these things may be very challenging for women to participate, mainly because many of women have to be balancing their work life and home life, or sometimes some literature calls it work-life balance. So that is the balance between the motherhood, the care for the family, and the work, the leadership positions that women may have. So in that regard, there are plenty of issues here that stem from inadequate care conditions for women, for children, etc. So there are many factors influencing that. Another hindrance is intersectionality, which is mentioned by many researchers, but disregarded by society. So whenever we try to understand the challenges that women face in leadership, generally, we look through the lens of gender only. However, in many contexts, as we are, multidimensional society, in many contexts, there are some other variables such as race, social class, religiosity, and many others that add to the kind of a bigger issue of challenges and hindrances together with the gender. Like, for example, challenges, Asian women face at leadership positions, or Black women face proceeding to leadership positions, or etc. So that intersectionality is very important to keep in mind while trying to understand the issues. And another one, which is framed around more kind of a macho culture or men-led culture, where women have to, often dare to lead, so-called, go through the barrier, which is very much linked to the glass ceiling. But here it's more going against the nature, because as I said earlier, and we established, the natural characteristics of female leadership are caring nature, a more kind of a participatory nature, whereas male types or styles of leadership are more kind of directive, more kind of a command. So often women going into leadership, into the man world, have to go against their nature. So what can we do, or well, what does literature, what does research suggest us, and what is it that we can do to support capacity building for female leaders? Well, first obvious things that come to our mind, and probably you have thought of these before, are influencing change at the top policy level, at the local policy level, like for example, introducing equal pay, flexible working, etc. Paying closer attention at the recruitment and staff retention stage when it comes to female leadership and empowering women in leadership. However, research also suggests an interesting dimension here, and that comes from Maruze 2018, that it's very important to capitalize on the strengths of female leaders while we are training future leaders or current in-service leaders. In many countries, there are state official kind of, or, private training systems that help in-service leaders to receive training as leaders. So they're being trained. Not all the countries offer that, but most of the countries do. And whatever they do, most of the leadership training programs are capitalizing on male-only ways of leadership styles, which is certainly disregarding the benefits to influence positive outcome for learners when it comes to leadership in education. So it's very important to think about capitalizing on those strengths when we're designing leadership programs for leaders in education. And another one that is also backed up very strongly by research is mentoring schemes. And many researchers are talking about it. And mentoring has proven to be very effective in supporting women in leadership, progressing through leadership, or aiming to apply for leadership positions. Considering all these interesting dimensions and areas in the topic of female leadership in education, I would like to explore this more through my research that I am conducting currently as a part of my MA dissertation in the context of Uzbekistan, where I'm from, where underrepresentation of women in educational leadership sector is tremendous, of course. Just to give you an example, we have just one female rector, which is also a big progress in the recent 4 years, I should say. One female rector within 123 higher educational institutions in Uzbekistan. Of course, we have a bit more women represented at the level of, public schools, schooling system. So I'll be looking at interviewing through the life history interview 4 female school directors, school heads, and looking into their life stories, the obstacles and challenges that they're facing, the opportunities that arise, and the perceptions they have over the female leadership in education. That will hopefully help me to compare the findings to the research globally in that area. And in addition, I would like to analyze the documentaries, the policies, the training curriculum for leaders, for school leaders, and understand where there are the opportunities that may arise, where there are the obstacles that are coming at that level. And to conclude my presentation, as promised, I would like to share this slide with inspirational reads that I found inspirational for myself. Honestly speaking, when I started my journey as a Chevening scholar doing MA in leadership and management in education, I never thought I would end up with exploring this topic. However, going through an exciting findings of the research done by various scholars across the globe, I was really involved in the topic. And if you don't have time to read all of that, you may say, well, we don't have time, just give us one that you would kind of sort out in the list. I would go for the first one, Women at the Top, by one of the probably most seminal writers in the field, Marianne Coleman, an English researcher who has interviewed 60 UK women at the top, not just in education, but including education, and has depicted on various interesting findings. So I would invite you to explore that work if you don't have time to read all of that, at least focus on this particular book. Just to conclude, I would like to thank once again all the organizers, Callum for the opportunity for facilitation, and all of you for your time and interest in this topic. And I'll be very happy to take your questions as appropriate at the end of the slot today. Thank you all very much and have a productive rest of the day.
Okay, thanks so much, Emine, for that brilliant presentation. So remember, just put any questions that you have, speaking to the audience here, put any questions you have in the Q&A box and we'll ask them all at the end. And so next up we have, oh, pardon me. Next up we have Hawa Ocheni, whose presentation will focus on third world approaches to global justice. So I believe that Hawa is going to play a video, but she is just going to introduce herself briefly to begin with.
Good morning to you, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me. Welcome to the Chevening Conference 2021. I'm very excited to be here, being a leader and trying to shape the changing world. So my name is Hawa Ocheni, and I'm pursuing a master's in international development law and human rights at the University of Warwick. And my topic today is third world approaches to global justice. And I'm particularly using the TWIL framework because I believe that international law as it is, particularly international criminal law, needs to be deconstructed to include and inculcate the global South. So please, could you play the video for me? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It is an honor and privilege for me to be participating in the Chevening Conference 2021. My name is Hawa Ocheni, pursuing an LLM in International Development Law and Human Rights at the University of Warwick. The title of my paper is Third World Approaches to Global Justice with a focus on international criminal law. I'm using the Third World Approaches to International Law theoretical framework. And by using this framework, the TWIL scholars do not only aim to dismantle and deconstruct international criminal justice, we aim to reimagine it and then dare to construct it in a way that encompasses the plight of the global South. Selectivity has long been the Achilles heel of international criminal justice. The International Criminal Court has constantly been accused and critiqued as being biased towards the global South and being complacent to crimes that are committed by the West. Selectivity was seen in the ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal Rwanda, and it was also seen in the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. This paper explores the different hierarchies of selectivity and goes ahead to highlight that group-based selectivity is subject to fierce contestation as it perpetuates a troubling civilizing mission that was used in attempts to justify colonialism itself. Secondly, this paper uses the TWIL theoretical framework to analyze the current situation in the global South and the West using relevant cases to illustrate. Finally, I conclude that group-based selectivity can be remedied. The International Criminal Court has brought substantial number of cases against low-level perpetrators. And this can be seen in the recent German case where Ruslan and Al-Gharib were prosecuted for the Kunduz airstrike. One would wonder why high-level perpetrators such as Colonel George Klein was not prosecuted. Because when Germany, under the universal jurisdiction, decides to prosecute the racialized other, that is Ruslan and Al-Gharib, they are signaling a troubling civilizing mission. And this was also seen in the case of France and Belgium, when France decided to prosecute a Rwandese, despite the fact that she had customary international immunity. This signals bias. It is an apparent bias. This clearly shows that law is not law for the equals, but for those who were never equal. It could be argued that high-level perpetrators have been prosecuted by the International Criminal Court, like Charles Taylor of Liberia, like Laurent Gbagbo of Côte d'Ivoire, and Hissène Habré of Chad. But a distorted picture of international criminal justice is painted because it clearly shows that some animals are more equal than others. When only high-level perpetrators from the global south are being prosecuted, and then high-level perpetrators from the global north or the west are not brought to book. This is very troubling. Jurists of the third world are very aware of this selective nature of the International Criminal Court and international criminal justice. 12 scholars have argued that international criminal law has been relegated to its colonial foundations. Selectivity. There are different strands of selectivity. I'm going to look into the 3 different types. According to Robert Cryer, we have selectivity rational persona and we have selectivity by stealth. Then Asad Kiani opined that we have the group-based selectivity. Selectivity rational persona is further divided into 2 aspects, the legality and the legitimacy. Legality has to do with the choices that the prosecutor makes and why she makes those particular selection of cases, while the legitimacy has to do with the substantive issues, that is the deep-seated issues in international criminal law. As Ian Brownlee postulated, selection of cases is motivated by power, patronage, and/or political influence. Rule of law entails consistency in application of the law, but when the prosecutor decides to only focus on some particular cases or prosecute a particular class of perpetrators, this is deeply troubling. When prosecutor Morano Ocampo honored the self-referrals made by Uganda and Democratic Republic of Congo, it opened the International Criminal Court to manipulation and compromised the legitimacy and legality of the court. The second type of selectivity is selectivity by stealth. And selectivity by stealth is divided into safe and unsafe. When selectivity is safe, it means that the jurisdiction of the court is not foisted on the nationals. For example, as we have seen in the ICTR and the ICTY. It is said to be unsafe when the jurisdiction of a court is foisted upon the nationals of a particular state. The third type of selectivity is the group-based selectivity. This occurs when similarly situated victims are treated differently, and Asad Kiani opines that this type of selectivity is very troubling and worrisome because it defies the very basis of international criminal justice. For example, I'll take Africa as a case study. The International Criminal Court has been heavily accused of focusing on Africa. In Uganda, the government officials were not prosecuted for the crimes committed against the Lord Resistance Army. In Côte d'Ivoire, Laurent Gbagbo was targeted. Meanwhile, Alassane Ouattara was not brought to book. Similarly, in Libya, Gaddafi was also targeted by the ICC and the opposition not brought to book as well. Then, in Central African Republic, Jean-Pierre Bemba was indicted. Meanwhile, his opposition, who committed grave crimes in the civil war, was not brought to book. This is seen as treating similarly situated cases differently. International criminal justice has been dubbed a Western new colonial project, and International Criminal Court a tool of the West. The West have been more influential in shaping the activities of the International Criminal Court in the interest of the Permanent Five, where they have been said to safeguard their own impunity. In fact, Mahmoud Mamdani is of the opinion that the International Criminal Court has become a court to try African perpetrators of mass crimes. This can be seen in the cases of Darfur, but when juxtaposed with other views, we can see that the ICC cannot act on its own volition, but it needs state cooperation. In 2003, at the very inception of the International Criminal Court, when Morano Ocampo became the first prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the first thing he would have done was to investigate the invasion of Iraq. But he did not do that. Instead, he went ahead to x-ray the globe for sites of crimes other than Afghanistan and Iraq. Maybe perhaps he did this because he said that he could not imagine prosecuting a US national, and this is in line with Robert Cook's submission that the International Criminal Court is not a court established to bring to book prime ministers of United Kingdom and United States. Frederick Magre, on the other hand, avers that the selectivity argument by the 12 scholars is very, very weak. He is of the view that the African states signed up to the Rome Statute of their own volition, and with just a few exceptions, most of the cases emanating from Africa are self-referrals. To remedy group-based selectivity, the prosecutor has the onus of furnishing all and sundry with a guideline to how prosecutorial decisions are made. Also, for a more cohesive, transparent, and equitable International Criminal Court, the prosecutor should explain why some cases are pursued and others are not. A very big thanks to Solange Mauthan and Christine Shebel-Patel of Warwick Law School for the fruitful conversations. Also, I'd like to thank Sir George Howard Morrison of the International Criminal Court. Also, a posthumous thanks to Professor Robert Cryer of the University of Birmingham, who sadly passed away on 3rd of January 2021. With his passing, a light went out in the international criminal law community.
Okay, thank you, Hawa, so much for that presentation. I learned a lot from that personally, and I'm looking forward to the third presentation. Can I just take a quick second just to remind everybody you can post your questions into the Q&A by using the chat, and we'll deal with all of the questions at the end. I don't see any questions yet, so I just wanted to make sure I took a second just to encourage everybody and remind you to post questions to the two scholars that we've heard from so far. So with that in mind, we're making good time here. So I just want to introduce our final presentation. Our final scholar is John Ogunjimi, and John will be presenting on crime scene investigation and justice delivery. How can forensic science benefit Nigeria? So I'm just going to hand over now.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to speak on this topic, and I'll share my screen in a moment. I believe you can hear me all right and see my screen. This morning, I'm presenting on crime scene investigation and justice delivery, and I'm looking at how forensic science can help Nigeria. My name is John Ogunjimi, and I'm a Chevening scholar studying Masters in Forensic Science at the University of Central Lancashire. I'm from Nigeria, as you can tell. My presentation this morning is going to, I'll just look at, introduce the topic and the concepts very quickly, and then look at a case study and present some, the challenges facing Nigeria using the model, a particular case study to explain what is going on. Also, during this presentation, I'll make some recommendations as well as conclusion and relate this to the challenge with leadership. Now, starting with forensic science is basically the application of science and law. And as we look at forensic science, it is an interdisciplinary field that brings together different aspects of science, both in the physical sciences and the biological sciences. While this application often pertains to law, it is so interdisciplinary in that it requires a complementary interaction. So there are sometimes that even forensics goes beyond the natural sciences, and then you go into some other forms of disciplines as well. But in all, it is just the application of these different fields in legal matters. And speaking of crime scene investigation is the search, the identification, the recovery, and the preservation of physical evidence that are of potential forensic interest with proper documentation of this process to aid the investigation of crimes. And looking at this definition, it's calls to question the challenge that we have in Nigeria at the moment, to ask if there is anything of this sort going on in investigating crimes. Speaking of justice, according to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, justice, the goal of the Sustainable Development Goal 16 is to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. And very importantly here is to provide access to justice for all. Everyone should be able to access justice and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. And the target of this goal is to promote the rule of law at the national and international levels and ensure that, again, there is equal justice for everyone. During my conclusion, I'll come back to this point, but I just want to emphasize that part of equal access to justice for everyone. Now, at the moment, looking at the state of the nation, there are quite a number of things going on in crime scene investigation. There has been an increase in crime rates, but I'll look at the state of forensic science in Nigeria at the moment. Starting with legislature, there are challenges facing the legislative aspects of forensic science, and this is probably the most significant of the challenges that are facing forensic science. While the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 makes some provisions for forensic evidence, the legislative arm of the government has not been able to pass any bill to support the implementation. And in most cases, these challenges, these forensic science applications are left to the discretion of a few individuals, leaving out some people to be disadvantaged. And at the moment, there are still legal concerns that surround the admissibility of forensic evidence in courts, and this calls for a prompt action on the side of the legislature. Infrastructure-wise, there are, as of 2018 or thereabout, there were only about 3 government-owned forensic laboratories to serve a population of 200 million people, which is ridiculous, because in 2017, the National Bureau of Statistics released a data showing that there were about 134,000 crimes committed in 2017 alone, which is a few years back already. And there has been an increase in crime up to this morning, continuous increase in crime rates in the country. So if we have only 3 laboratories, forensic laboratories, to serve a population of 200 million people, it means that cannot, there can be no justice in that situation. Also, of these 3 laboratories, one is not, they are not specifically crime laboratories. So there is a big deficiency in the aspect of infrastructure. One of the 3 laboratories last year was vandalized and was set ablaze, so it's not even functional at the moment, rendering the people working there without job, and also limiting the capacity of crime investigation. Now, one of my very passionate areas in forensic science is the education aspect, education and training. And looking at, as of 2009, some scholars reported that only a few institutions in Nigeria were offering forensic science. And going by the statistics available, using a few may even be a little flattering, because we have over about 250 higher institutions in Nigeria, and only 3 higher institutions were offering forensic science. So even talking about a few seems a bit flattering to me. It was not until 2001, some months ago in February, that another institution, the Nigerian University Commission, approved another institution to start running forensic science. But beyond the approvals being granted, a major concern of mine has been the capacity of these institutions to provide quality education in forensic science, because forensic science is a practical field that requires the resources and laboratory and equipment and a lot of infrastructure to communicate that knowledge to those who are learning. And these things are not yet available in the country, yet we have approval of courses. So that's another challenge that we have at the moment. And flowing straight from education into training, it's quite obvious that those who are supposed to be enforcing forensic science or showing that they have the knowledge of forensic science are not doing that. In terms of training of police officers who are expected to be the ones investigating crimes, I don't think there's any Nigerian who can say that they are confident in the ability of an average police officer to investigate crime. You see police officers walking into crime scenes themselves unprotected, no gloves, no CSI suit, nothing, and contaminating the crime scenes themselves. By the time I go to the case study, I will speak more on this, but we have the challenge of training forensic scientists in the country. And as in support of that, there are also those who are assumed to have been trained, who are not doing what they are trained to do. The unprofessional conduct of some police officers has bred a distrust of the citizens in the country. Now, in terms of practice, I must say that where there has been a failure of legislative support, where there is no infrastructural provision, where the quality of education and standard training are very low or even missing, the natural expectation is that there will be a failure in practice. So these, although there are private consultants who do a few things in Nigeria regarding forensic science, the challenge we have at the moment is that nationwide, there is an insufficiency in the forensic capacity of the nation to investigate crimes. And as I will show later, where the crime scene is compromised, every other thing regarding justice can also not be trusted. Now, just as a summary, to mention the present challenges of investigation, there are alleged miscarriages of justice. The usual thing in Nigeria at the moment is that when there is a crime and it is reported, the police often goes to a crime scene and then they just arrest anybody they can see, imprison them. And as far back as 2017, there was a report by Amnesty International that about 70% of those who are in Nigerian prisons have not been convicted of any crime, but there is no further evidence to either discharge them and accuse them or to prosecute them further. So they are imprisoned for offenses that some people don't even know anything about. So there is miscarriage of justice. Sometimes you arrest those who are not guilty, and sometimes those who are guilty are actually walking around free, which is a very big challenge to justice. There is also the absence of forensic training and continuous development. There is a lack of funding, and at the background of this image, of this slide, is the Lagos State DNA and Forensic Center, which was vandalized last year. It was a result of private-public partnership to enable forensic science, but even at the moment, that is not functional. So there's a distrust of citizens in the policing system. When people are in challenge, in a problem, they find it difficult to trust the police to be fair and just. And also there's a lack of willpower and perceived deliberate effort of the government to suppress approval of policies that support forensic science. And this is probably due to benefits that some people have alleged that the government gains from the destabilization of things, because when there is forensic science, you can be sure that to a very reasonable extent, justice is going to be served. But when the criminals are being sponsored by government officials as alleged, or even have collaborations in the police, then one can easily see why there will be no support for forensic science. Now, using a case study, I'll be talking about the challenge we have at the moment with forensic science. And this is a case of a young lady aged 20 named Emine, who posted on Twitter recently that she needed a job and she was invited for a job. By this person, the suspect, Akpan, invited her for a job. She informed her friend. On April 29, she went missing. Her friend posted on Twitter that she was missing, and after a lot of information on the social media, he was identified and arrested by the police. But one would have thought that this would have led to a proper investigation of the crime. Unfortunately, that is not what's happened. Now, looking at some of the crime scene investigation techniques that we have, I'll just highlight some of them and use it to explain the challenge that we have in Nigeria. Now, these are things that are taken for granted in developed countries, and for anyone who is familiar with the process of forensic science, these are basic things in forensic science. But one will wonder why things as basic as this are not available in Nigeria and why they appear to be novel in Nigeria. Now, according to the suspect, he alleged that he invited her for an interview. He raped her eventually. He admitted to raping her and killing her in self-defense. That at first she hit him with a stabilizer and then he hit her back. But looking at all this, if his testimony were to be taken as true, a very simple thing would have been, first of all, to begin with a fingerprint analysis. going to the crime scene, picking up the said stabilizer, looking for the prints of the victim on the stabilizer, if any. But none of this was done. There is no report of any forensic investigation in this regard. And that shows that, number one, there are no forensic experts, fingerprint experts who are able to investigate crimes. Even the police, the video that showed them going to the crime scene showed that nobody was even prepared as a crime scene investigator to attend the crime scene. And if there were evidence, pieces of evidence of forensic interest, by the video of them going to the crime scene alone, these things would have been compromised. The evidence would have been compromised. There's blood spatter analysis. He alleged that she hit him with a stabilizer, he hit her with the same stabilizer, and one would expect that there would have been blood. Of course, looking at him, there was no sign of any injury, but blood spatter analysis would have shown if the allegations were true or if his confession was false. DNA analysis would have been done to confirm, and footwear impression. These are basic techniques in crime scene investigation. Digital forensics was engaged at some point, but not by the police, by an independent, by another reporter, a journalist, who did some digital forensics and was able to come up with some facts that opened up more about the case. But one wonders, if the police had these resources at their disposal, why none of this was done to prove, to review more about the case. Now, there is forensic archaeology, where the suspect eventually led the police team to the source of to where he buried, a shallow grave where he buried the body of the lady. And one will expect that the police will create a cordon and from there begin excavation, but they just went there, dug up the body, and people are left wondering, because there were other people who said that there were other graves there. The suspect admitted that this victim was not his first rape victim. He had raped others in the past, but he said that this was his first murder victim. But other people who visited the scene said there were other shallow graves there, which the police denied. But no cordon was created, no forensic archaeology was done. They only went there, dug up the grave, brought her out, and were trying to close the case. So all of this show the challenge that we have with crime scene investigation in Nigeria. As a conclusion, I must say that forensic science is not an option in criminal justice. It is a necessity. And as long as it is seen as an option, the crime scenes will continue to be compromised. And when crime scene is compromised, justice is already compromised. If the crime scene cannot be maintained, the integrity of the crime scene cannot be maintained and be shown to have been maintained, then any judgment that is passed after that is also questionable. Also to mention that criminal justice is the function of all levels of government. And very important is that justice for a few is injustice, and injustice for most is injustice to all. I'll say that again. Justice for a few and injustice for most is injustice to all. Cases that receive publicity and all that, they get, the government sometimes puts in resources to make them investigate, to ensure that they are properly investigated. But for the average citizen, nothing is done. So justice for a few, injustice to most is injustice to all. Justice for most and injustice for a few is still injustice to all. And until there is justice for all, there is no justice at all. Now, as leaders in our changing world, everything rises and falls on leadership, as John Maxwell says. Nigeria needs strong leaders, both in the police and in the government, to pioneer a forensic revolution. And stakeholders in forensic science need to synergize and ensure that forensics takes its rightful place in the criminal justice system of Nigeria. The government needs to consider privatizing the forensic science market, as using the model of the UK. The forensic science service in the UK was dissolved and privatized so that there can be transparency. Also, the challenges we have with the police in the Nigerian system shows that there's a distrust of citizens in the police. So the government should provide a strong legislative backing for forensic science and set up a specialized crime scene investigation team that should be responsible for training, practice, and equipping other people in forensic science. Educational, training, and regulatory institutions will also be established to produce more indigenous forensic scientists. At the moment, issues that need forensic investigation are sometimes exported out of the country. Samples are exported for analysis outside the country and returned back. And the longer the chain of custody is, the lower the integrity of the evidence. So the government also needs to invest in research and development of modern forensic techniques. These are some of the references, and I thank everyone who has contributed to this discussion, both the lecturers in my university that I had discussions with, and I also thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, John, for that really interesting presentation. And so now I think we have all of our scholars joining us for the Q&A, and we have 15 minutes for the Q&A. So if you have any questions for our scholars, you can type them into the Q&A box at the moment. And just for the benefit of anyone who might have joined late and not heard me say this earlier on, the presenters won't be typing answers to the questions. I will be posing them on your behalf, and they'll be answering them verbally. So if your question isn't selected, as I said earlier on, and you might have missed it if you've joined later, you can carry on the conversation in the Chevening Class of 2020 Facebook group or in the designated chat box. So let's just get into it. So we do have a couple of questions at the moment so far, and I really strongly encourage you, because I know there's plenty of participants. We have 50 participants in this session, so I really encourage you to type questions into the chat box. So there's two questions that are quite strongly related, and these are both directed to our first presenter, Emine. So I'm going to just take them kind of both and read them both together, because I think they're both strongly related to each other. Is that okay? And hopefully you've all got your mics activated. Yeah, okay, there we go. Okay, so this is to do with the idea of a gendered leadership style, both questions. So one question from Michaela. I assume, by the way, I'm pronouncing names properly. That's one of the disadvantages when people just type them. I've never met anyone before. So the one is from Michaela, and Michaela asks, recognizing a gendered leadership style, i.e. male or female, arguably perpetuates the stereotypical belief that male and female should behave differently. Instead, can we drive a change in encouraging organizations to recognize effective leadership with common attributes that are not gendered? And that relates also to Kwame, and again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name, who asks a similar kind of question, which is, considering women as naturally caring is a socio-culturally constructed bias that reinforces patriarchy, arguably. Don't you think that the point resembles using the gendered idea of using emotion, for example, rather than skills to back up advocacy for social justice in educational leadership? So I think these two questions are quite closely related.
Thank you very much, Callum, for voicing the questions. And I would like to thank Michaela and the second participant. I'm very sorry I didn't hear the name properly, for the questions. I think you are right in asking these questions, and I've been thinking about this while doing my own research and going through the literature available. So the point here is really not to just juxtapose the female leadership against male leadership. The point is in recognizing and acknowledging the effective characteristics of each of the leadership styles, and embedding them while training future or existing leaders and supporting them in developing leadership styles. That is to say that there is no argument to say that female styles of leadership cannot be enacted by men. Certainly they can, and they should be encouraged. Same way they should, the female leaders should be encouraged to enact male styles of leadership, because if we reflect back on our own leadership experiences, we we may have a certain style, but depending on the situation and context, we may behave differently as leaders. And sometimes we can be more assertive, more kind of enacting the command style of leadership. And very often we can find ourselves being collaborative as well. It is just that there is very significant injustice in research and acknowledgement of female natural styles of leadership, and they're not viewed as effective, as strong as male are done across the research for many years. So it's very important to establish these justice in order to form, as you rightly say, a kind of a unanimous understanding of what an effective leadership is, and promote that for the well, in education, certainly for the benefit of all learners and the learning outcomes for them. As for the second question, I was also thinking, and I'm now still here to explore within the case of Uzbekistan, because the literature defines the role of women in Uzbekistan very much being, you know, around caring, about being mothers, about being family carers, and whether there is at all any room for leadership and recognizing women as leaders. So this is something that I am about to investigate through an interpretive research, so I can't make any conclusions at the moment. However, I think recognizing the challenges that women face. So, for example, many women in the West, and the research tells us, had to jeopardize their desires to become mothers when they wanted to become leaders. So they went simply child-free. So I'm not sure whether this kind of the other end of this continuum is just as well. I don't think it is. So I think it's all about going into the research, going into understanding the natures, and trying to balance these both ends, both recognizing the desires of women to be mothers, but fathers can be equally participatory in the care provision for families, for children. So there are different dimensions to that, and I don't think either of the continuum ends have the right for justice. It's all about balancing here, I think. I hope I could answer your questions, but feel free to continue if I didn't, and I'll be very happy to continue outside of the framework of this conference, certainly. Thank you very much once again for your questions.
Thank you so much, Emine, for that comprehensive answer there. Those were two quite challenging questions, I think, and that was a really, really interesting answer to those. So if I may, I would like to take the opportunity to pose a question to Hawa that came up for me during your presentation. And that was just about actually the title of the presentation. As I was listening to you talk, obviously there was a strong focus on decoloniality and in a sense the need to decolonize international law. And the title to the talk, Third World Approaches to Global Justice, just made me want to ask actually, you know, why you chose the term third world approaches and how you use that term in this particular context, simply because I know that there are many, obviously, that consider the term third world to be either anachronistic or even derogatory. So it's quite a loaded term. So I just wanted to ask about your use of that particular term in the context of your work.
Thank you very much, Callum. Actually, I actually found it troubling using that word. And I used that word advisedly, looking at the pioneers of the Twill scholarship, like Bupinda Chimney, people like Makau Mutua, James Gathi, and all that. They all use this term advisedly for want of word to use. We don't like using the words global south, developing country, you know, third world. But for me to really capture the context of international criminal law, I have to use words like global south. It's deeply troubling to be using these words because this is like categorization of people, and it's not good to, you know, profile people into third world, global south, developing countries. These are some of the things that we aim to deconstruct. But if you want to deconstruct it and, you know, reimagine it in another way, we have to use these terms so that people understand. And I'm hopeful that in the future, TWIL scholarship, we have a lot of, okay, I'll call myself now a TWIL scholar. After being a Chevening scholarship, yes, I align strongly with TWIL scholarship. Yes, I'm part of them now. So we hope to, in the future, we're in the process of deconstructing it.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. Now, I don't want to take up everybody's time asking my own questions. So I'm looking here in the Q&A box for questions from others. There is one, and apparently this is a question for all presenters. And the question is really which is quite a big question. What are the solutions that you're exploring and proposing for the main challenges that each of you raised in your presentations? Maybe we could just take it in the order that everybody spoke. So if we start with Emine first. All
right, I'll try to be very quick to offer opportunity for others to speak as well, because generally I have covered the solutions in my presentation. So the solutions that I have covered so far are really prompted by the research in the area. So and they are divided into two different kind of say sections or areas. One deriving from a more kind of policy making section, through which it's very important to establish equal pay where it doesn't exist between women and men at leadership positions, well, generally by in leadership positions in specific. Flexible working, adequate family or child care so that women can devote themselves adequately to enacting their leadership roles. And the second area or second kind of section of it is all about building or capitalizing on the strengths of women in leadership and introducing those learning points into the that comes from research, from empirical research, into the training programs while we are training women for leadership, not just in education, all across certainly, but just because I focus in the area of education, I was really making focus on that. But certainly most of the findings that I was talking about that come from research can be applicable all throughout, same way as the findings of underrepresentation of women in corporate sector was influencing the research in education, same way it can just go back across the sectors. That's it from me to that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so to Hawa and then John on that question.
Okay, the solution proposing for the third world approaches to global justice. For there to be third approaches to global justice, the first point of call is the academia. And for that reason, this is one of the sole reasons I chose the Warwick Law School, because we apply the law in context at Warwick Law School. It's mostly a decolonization thing. Yes, and it's law in context. Like we try to look outside what law can provide for us, how we can, disrupt the status quo. So the first point of call is academia. And then the Office of the Prosecutor. The solution is that we should try as much as possible to put fire to the feet of, presently it's Fatou Bensouda, her tenure is almost ending, to give us reasons why some cases are being selected. Why do you select particular perpetrators over others? So these are some of the answers that we're looking for. And it's only through academia that we can reach her. And, there's starting to be calls and people are answering us, okay, give us reasons, for example, why the case of Iraq, why wasn't the UK brought to book with regards to the invasion of Iraq? Why? But you went all the way to Africa, X-raying all those places in Africa. So we look for answers to that. So that's just the solution, I say. But the starting point ultimately is academia.
Thanks, Hawa. And then so finally to John, on the solutions to the challenges that you raised.
Thank you. The question is very pertinent, and just to say that the answers are also very interrelated. Starting with a willpower to see forensics as not just being an option in crime scene investigation. Some of these methods I've described, they are things that are taken for granted in places like the US, like the UK. When there is a crime and the police assesses the crime scene, they determine whether the crime scene team, the CSI team, should come in or not. But regardless of the severity of the case in Nigeria, the police just assumes that, well, as long as we have somebody who is confessing to a crime, whether the person is proven guilty or not, as long as we have somebody who is confessing to the crime, then the case is closed. And so there are several cases of people who are arrested who know nothing about the crime, but they are not investigated because there is no access to justice. The average Nigerian cannot, personally, while growing up twice, we were at home, we were attacked by armed robbers, things were stolen, police report was made, and not once did the police ever come to the crime scene to say, what happened here? When you make a police report, as long as the criminals are no longer there, they don't see the need to investigate the crime because there are no resources, and probably they are not even equipped to investigate the crime scene. So that's one part. There should be that sense of the importance of crime scene investigation, protecting the crime scene. And when that is done, the country and the government and everyone else can now apply that same importance to training and educating forensic scientists. I am an advocate of education, and I believe that if we have more universities in the country who are offering courses in forensic sciences, there can be more indigenous forensic scientists who are trained and capable of assisting the police in doing this work. So there's the part of seeing the need, making available the legislative support for the admissibility of forensic evidence in courts, and also developing indigenous forensic scientists to be able to assist with criminal investigations. And when that is done, we can rest assured that when it comes to delivery of justice, we can be satisfied that to the best of the ability of the executor of that, justice is being served, and not just anybody is being arrested or being discharged at will.
Thanks so much, John. And now I have another question that's for you, and it's from Shin. And the question is, first of all, saying fascinating presentation, but so the question is, how does the privatization of forensic science increase transparency?
Yeah, thank you very much. The first thing is I mentioned that there's a distrust of citizens in the police. If the police is left with investigating crime scenes, nobody will believe what they are doing. The case study I made recently, the allegation is that the police is complicit in the crime that was committed because the suspect eventually, after investigation, it was discovered that he had a family member in the police who is assumed to have helped him or to have been helping him in the past in covering up crime. So, and this is not in 2017, 2019, a statistics was released that showed that the most corrupt government institution, government agency in Nigeria was the Nigerian police. That was released by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics itself. So when the police is alleged to be corrupt, the people do not trust them. If a police officer comes to somebody's house and says, okay, we heard there's been a crime here. Sometimes people have been known to report a crime to the police and they get up being arrested for the crime they reported, crime that was committed against them. So when there is a separate unit, privatized preferably, and in the UK that was done because for economic purposes, I suppose. But when that is done, the transparency can be seen that this is an independent actor who has no interest in whether a case, and they are liable, they are responsible to the court and not to the police or to the person who has employed them. So that privatization gives room for transparency and also makes it more, gives the opportunity to encourage more people to come into the field, because if it's limited to just police officers, no one is sure as to whether the people who are being selected to investigate the crime are also have an interest in protecting the police when the police has also been indicted in some cases.
Thanks again, John. So I note now that we have 3 minutes until the end of the Q&A. I don't know if anyone else has maybe one last question. I certainly think we've only got time for one last question maximum. So I don't see any more questions from the audience at this point in time. So it's probably a good time to wrap this up as we're getting towards 12 o'clock. So maybe let me just take the time again to thank all of you, thank all of our presenters. in the law and social justice category for all these brilliant presentations today. And again, just to remind everybody, if you had a question that you were thinking about asking and you've just not posed it yet, then carry on the conversation in the Facebook group that I mentioned earlier or in the designated chat box. So the other thing that I've been directed to say actually is that you can also post about today's event on the social media using the hashtag Chevening Conference 21. So I think now we've got time for some networking, and then I think it's a short lunch break. So if you could join Annie in the main room at 1 o'clock for the beginning of the afternoon session, which will include a panel discussion on leadership and then 2 further sessions, I believe, on development, technology, human rights and conflict. So thank you all very much. Thank you again to the presenters, and thank you to the audience for such great questions. And thank you to the support team in the background who were making this all run smoothly. It was a total pleasure to be able to chair this today.
Thank you very much. Have a productive rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.